Okay, I'm here with Dave Hamilton, and this guy is incredibly brilliant at figuring out power consumption for electric vehicles. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bio for everyone?
Yeah, okay. So quick, long story short, I'm a registered professional forester. I did all my training in British Columbia. I have a background in bachelor's in forest resource management from the University of British Columbia, a master's in geomatics from the University of British Columbia, and then I'm currently pursuing a PhD in forest engineering at Oregon State University. Oregon State University, if you guys didn't know, is the #1 forestry school in the United States.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, I know. Fun fact, right? Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and my specialty is I'm studying electric logging trucks. In North America right now, there are two PhD students studying electric logging trucks. One guy's in Laval. His specialty is batteries in the cold. And then there's me. Mine is power consumption across a forest landscape.
Okay, and how do you approach looking at power requirements for like electric logging trucks? And how's that a little bit different than a diesel?
So great question. The huge thing that's different about electric vehicles compared to regular vehicles is that they feature regenerative braking. Regenerative braking is key to my research. It's the process by which when you apply the brakes, instead of with a regular diesel-powered vehicle where you just generate heat and noise and stop the vehicle, you can actually recharge the battery. This is particularly important in forestry because we drive an empty truck from the bottom of a valley to the top of a mountain, fill it and triple its weight, and then drive it all the way back down the hill. Force, as you guys know, is mass times acceleration. So when we increase the braking force of the vehicle coming down the mountain, we actually increase the range of the vehicle. With electric vehicles, the #1 thing that's stopping people from investing in electric vehicles is range anxiety. There's tons of reports and papers on that. So by providing people with a tool where they can visualize the entire forest landscape and how much energy it takes to travel to a forest harvest unit or harvest block and then back, landowners and decision makers can instantly see how much energy they could be gaining and range bonuses they could get from investing in electric vehicles. So that's what I've done. I've created a system that maps the amount of energy it takes for a vehicle to travel out to a forest polygon and back. It also factors in whether you're stopping at multiple locations or need to go through a particular route.
So you have to do the whole like topographical landscape
Yes.
for
Yeah.
how do you model that? Because you put something in Google Maps and it's just all it's doing is distance, kilometers, miles. It doesn't tell you about your up, down.
Yeah. So mine uses a variety of different factors to determine how much energy is getting used. It calculates between an entire forest. It breaks the forest into a network. The network is filled with points, which are intersections, places where the truck could turn around, or just end locations of roads, where the roads naturally end at. And then the things connecting all of those points are road segments. The road segments have values like how much rolling resistance there is, or how long they are, and then each of the points have an elevation. Using that data and the truck data, so like what the powertrain efficiency is or regenerative braking efficiency is, we can determine what the gravitational force acting on the truck is, what the rolling resistance of the truck is, and what the air resistance against the truck is. All of these put together, my model uses to determine how many joules the truck uses. And then those joules is how much energy it costs for the truck to travel across the network. And then to minimize that, I use a algorithm that was developed in the 50s, which minimizes how much energy, or minimizes the route that it takes to travel across those areas.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, so David, looking forward to sharing that data with you when we build the first truck, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yep.
in terms of like approaching manufacturers, have you had any success talking to other trucking companies?
Yeah, so the people that I've actually been mostly talking with are the salespeople for things like Kenworth. So what's really interesting is they're actually telling all of their salesmen to expect over the next 10 to 15 years for the majority of their trucks in 10 years are actually going to be battery electric or hybrid vehicles, because down in Oregon and Washington State and California, they've all mandated that heavy duty vehicles by 2035 have to be zero emission.
Wait, they're mandating the hybrid because Kenworth doesn't have a hybrid truck yet.
Yeah, I know.
They're
So-
telling salesmen to do hybrid. They don't have a hybrid.
Yep.
Interesting.
We have the only hybrid truck that I know of on the market.
Yeah, you guys have the only hybrid
Yeah.
logging truck on the entire market. Yep. They're mandating that all heavy duty off-road vehicles by 2035 have to be zero emission, but how they seek to do that is, and whether the manufacturers can keep up with policy, is going to be really interesting. Because just because the government's mandated it has to be done doesn't mean we're going to hit those targets on time, but it still means that manufacturers are going to try to hit those targets, because otherwise they're going to be hit with penalties that are going to disincentivize them to keep producing traditional vehicles. And given people have to replace their logging trucks every 7-ish years,
Yeah.
you know, it makes sense that right now no one's going to be buying hybrid vehicles because there's range anxiety and not enough chargers and stuff like that. But in 7 to 10 years, it could be a totally different story.
So
Yeah.
in your model, what did you kind of figured on a logging truck? Roughly, what are you looking at for like average fuel savings?
That's a good question, and I can't give you a good answer right now.
That's where I always struggle. People always ask me that, and I never have a good answer. But it's the only vehicle where you can actually get negative energy consumption in.
Yeah, so yeah, that is much more interesting to talk about. So what's really cool about electric vehicles is that regenerative braking. So unlike every single other vehicle routing software that currently exists, like all of the Esri products and all of the Google Maps products, all of those, when they consider routes, they check either distance or time to determine what the shortest route is. But with electric vehicles, we can start considering just energy. And when we consider energy, we can recharge our vehicles as we travel across a landscape. And that recharge of energy really provides the opportunity to increase range and give us increased opportunities. My research has shown that this is especially prevalent in really short stints when there is extreme elevation changes.
Yeah, makes sense.
But it is also, all of these things make it so hard when people, they always ask us, well, what's the fuel mileage savings on your truck? And the real answer is like, it exists, but we can't tell you unless we really know your route. So like having like a program like you've been developing here, and we take that information and be like, well, where are you hauling? And I'll tell you exactly when you enter it in there. Because right now you're like, how steep and how heavy are you? Where's your load at? And you have to do like rough calculations. And like, it's very crude. And like, it is showing you can get that. Anyway, like rough calculations, you can show like a 50 to almost a 90% increase in fuel economy on a logging truck.
Yep.
There's been some where we've showed models and you enter some things and you can literally see 100% increase in fuel mileage. If you do the math right on a logging truck, because you're going uphill empty, you come downhill loaded, you are actually, the truck produces more power than that truck will ever use. Like you take something like a fat truck on the coast, those big off-highway ones that are just tripping their bunks into the water, they will literally produce more energy in their lifetime than they consume. They'll never need to fire up. They wouldn't even need a diesel generator because of how much regenerative braking power comes in. Now on the flat ground, just rolling hills, it's going to be a little less.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so hard, and it's like without a program like yours, we wouldn't be able to actually type things in and like,
at least with that precision, right?
Yep.
And what's great too about your model is it could give us a bit more insight on how big we should make our batteries based on the application. Because right now I built a battery size that's relatively smaller, but enough to get that C rating needed to give us an insane amount of horsepower. But what if we could eventually, over time, just make a battery electric vehicle?
Yep.
Well, that's where your model comes into play. Because then we could essentially lower the generator size, increase the generator size, or even eliminate it.
well,
right?
that's the problem we got right now, is that right now our best guess is like, well, put in something that's bigger than what you need, because it's better to have too much power and too much battery than not enough. But like, actually use a model and like fine tune that down rather than guesstimating.
Yep.
Like, do I need a 4-liter engine, a 3-liter engine, an 8-liter engine, an 18-liter engine?
Would that be cool?
Yeah, like a nice road train or something, like
No
a big
doubt.
C18 or QSK Cummins.
We'll be building those for sure.
Oh yeah, one day, but
Guaranteed.
no, but the work you're doing is really, really interesting on that.
Yeah, thanks guys.
This first truck's got a lot of information things on it that'll record all the fuel mileage, all that stuff. And
That's what we really want to do in the first few years, is collect data, right? Because with data, that's the greatest sales tools you could ever possibly use, right? What's your real world savings in fuel, and we'll go from there.
And then does this apply to like your program to the highway too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Very cool.
so I have a whole list of things that I want to add to my tool over the next few months here. One of them is including all of the USGS highway data because they have incredibly detailed surveys of all of their highways and stuff like that. And the Department of Transportation has GIS layers that show where all of the highways throughout all of America are. So one interesting thing to add to the tool would be a database of every single highway. That way, when you guys go to deploy your individual trucks within individual road networks, they could actually just add on those networks to the edges of the highways.
Hold on, wait a second though. I just had a thought. Could you use a program like that, put it into the truck's computer on, say, a hybrid? This is off in the distant future, but could you put it and then tell the generator of the truck when to fire up? Like, hey, I know that you're coming up on a 11% grade for 4 or 5 kilometers. You're going to need X amount of battery. You only have this amount of battery right now. And the generator can or it can say, hey, the inverse. You're about to go down a real big hill. I'm going to dump all that power because you're going to put this much power into the... So you could do that.
Yes.
Holy shit, that's... Okay, I'm getting it, I'm getting it.
It'll know by the end of your trip what percentage of battery you'll have. That's how smart it is. Just starting your trip, it'll actually estimate how much percentage you have.
Okay, that's cool.
Awesome.
Okay. And then I guess then we can get that data, go back and then fine tune it over other trucks and keep fine tuning it, make it more and more efficient.
And just imagine with like 100 of these trucks on the road, you could just create like a rich set of data that you can use to make your models and maps better and better over time. Right?
That's cool. Right now, our truck has an on-off switch on the driver's seat, so the driver starts his generator. If the battery hits a certain level, it'll fire up automatically, and then other than that, it needs there's an override off and an override on to let the driver decide when he wants the power or not. But if we use this, then we can, we will use this, but when we get it in there and get that figured, we can actually have all of that. And it probably would make it a lot more efficient, I'm guessing.
It also, I think the next step for the tool too would be to factor in operator time and then calculate in terms of energy how much energy that costs, calculate the commercial rates of energy, and then factor in the operator time and how much you have to pay someone to operate it, and then minimize route based on the cost of operation. That way you could have multiple routes. One goes this way and costs the minimum amount of energy, one goes this way and is the fastest, and then one goes this way and costs the least amount of money for the planner of the forest operations. Because in forest operations, 40 to 60% of harvesting is just paying for the timber to get delivered and doing the...
you're talking about when you're laying out a road on the block, you could lay it out in the way that's the most efficient, or
no?
Route selection.
Yeah, what I'm talking about is route selection. Yeah, and harvest planning, because when we as forest operations planners go to plan cycles and stuff like that, the cycle time is super important. That's where you make or break your money. And the log truck drivers, they are obsessed about getting the right cycle time down. So if you have a tool that you guys know, right? Yeah,
I know.
So if you have a tool that perfectly accurately calculates how much money it costs, that factors in that regenerative braking efficiency, then you have a potential to offer more money to the guys who are just driving the truck.
Yeah, no doubt. Classic. Yeah, it's incredible to think that with data you can estimate all this stuff even before purchasing your truck. So it gives all of our customers the availability to understand, okay, what's our return on this thing.
Yep.
So it essentially turns a truck into an actual meaningful asset right out of the gate.
It does, yeah. And then you could factor in MPV to determine over the long term how much money you're making based on investing in an Edison Motors truck versus a conventional diesel truck.
Yeah, because we know that the truck price tag will essentially give sticker shock to some of our clients, and we want to say, hey, you're essentially going to be producing a surplus of energy. Therefore, that additional capex is totally worth it, because at the end of the day, you're spending a lot less and your return is far better.
Yeah.
And to be able to show that in a model even before they make a purchase, like you said, you could sit down and actually talk about a route. Isn't that crazy?
A route, where you hauling? Let me show what your fuel savings are. This is your actual, we got to live the model we're working on right now, and you can't enter the route. It doesn't have as much information as it should, but it will. Right now, we got a crude model going that will show you how much your fuel savings is. Yeah. But if it can get down and be no, this is your exact fuel savings. Therefore, our truck is going to cost 25% more, 30% more than a standard truck. So if you can be but you're saving 50% more fuel every single month, that's an extra $7,000 a month. Your truck payment, your additional truck payment's only $2,000, $3,000 a month additional payment. you're saving 7,000 a month. That means you're doing 4,000 a month. It's double your return by getting this truck over. Like, to be actually able to have that data, and right now, our models underestimate the amount of fuel savings. That's a big problem because it can't factor in the downhill, uphill. It's factoring fuel savings on relatively flat ground, the stop and go city driving. It can factor that in. Then it's a crude amount of the regen. Like we kind of have to estimate how much regen you're going to have on that route. Like we know roughly city driving, you may have this much regen. Steep logging, you may have this, but it's a crude number. If we have the actual route and the actual data, we can pinpoint that to like the dollar figure of fuel savings.
Yeah. And that's just fuel, like not even maintenance, right?
Yep.
So like, I mean, what a great starting platform. Like
Yep.
that would be so cool. Yeah.
I mean, that actually is one of the best selling things. Like, yes, it's got more power, a little bit more reliability, but at the end of the day, they're going to care about saving money.
Mhm.
The accountants that make the decisions are the larger companies.
Yeah, the people that are going to be investing in these machines are the major licensees, because the mom and pop owner operators, they don't have the money to be able to afford to buy one of these. So it's the warehousers or the West Frasers, the people that own their own fleets, that are going to try and buy one of these first. So if you guys can provide proof that their bottom line will improve, they can't say no. You know, it's like people ask me all the time, like, are these electric vehicles really going to be a thing? Like, you know, there's so much fear and stuff around them. And I'm like, well, my grandfather was a hand faller, and he went out for a week on end with 7 other dudes and cut down trees on the side of Vancouver Island with a hand axe. And then one year, H.R. McMillan bought chainsaws for everyone.
Yeah.
Within 2 years, every single operator had a chainsaw.
Yeah.
The same thing happened with GPSs when I was in the field back in the 2013s. I lived through remote sensing golden age. Everyone has a tablet now when they're doing layout and forestry.
Yeah.
So all it's going to take is the really big players to invest in your technology and to realize, whoa, we can make more money by paying a little bit up front and then owning these machines for a while. And everyone else is going to have to invest in them, because otherwise they're going to lose, because the major licensees will have the competitive advantage.
Oh yeah, I mean when you look at that kind of fuel savings, which is like the largest cost, besides wages, fuel's the largest cost for running these trucks. If you can knock that down in half, there's no one that can compete against that. And it's plus, I was talking with some of these licensees, and they're talking about their block layouts with the regenerative braking and the holdback being a lot more, and the amount of power. And then you're talking about steer axles. You can make an electric steer axle,
and you can put motors on every single wheel. That's huge in
put
forestry.
motors on the trailer. You can have holdback on the trailer, holdback on the steers.
Yep.
And I thought, I'm like, oh, it'll make the driver's life a lot easier. Then you talk to the foresters and the licensees, and they're like, oh, well, maybe that's not going to be a cable block now. We could actually, like, well, okay, maybe a 35% adverse isn't that bad if you got the pulling power. And, like, yeah, if you're coming down 35%, well, now we can get that grade. Like, okay, cool, you're going to send the trucks down skidder trails now. But it reduced that cycle time, reduce that road building time, rather than, you know, get rid of one switchback, make her a little bit steeper. And unfortunately for the driver, is that as soon as I brought it up, their thought was not, oh, well, that'll be easier. And the driver's thought is, oh, we'll be able to get into a lot of timber that wasn't accessible again. But that's the thing, is like, you run a nice tire inflator system, your central tire inflator system.
Yes.
You have more torque, more hold back.
Yep.
Well, you can get into blocks that were previously uneconomically feasible, because you can get into worse. And then you start looking at things like breakup, and it gets muddy. Well, now if you have more axles pulling you, your trucks, you push that time a week on each end. You gain a week in the spring and a week in the fall.
It's a lot of timber.
2-3 weeks of actual increased production.
Yep.
Basically makes 3 months, 4 months of truck payments. Right there, not even fuel savings. It's more economically feasible just to push that production time back more.
All right, I got some more cool points.
Yeah.
All right,
Sure.
so another really cool point is some major licensees and mill owners that own fleets also own cogen plants.
Mm-hmm.
So they also have the potentiality to bring the timber all the way back to their mill, make all their wood, and then chip it, and then use those chips to power cogen facilities which generate energy. Normally, they sell all that energy back to the cities, but what they could use that energy for first is to charge their logging fleets. And that would incredibly reduce the price of charging all of their vehicles.
Well, the mill in town here has a big cogen plant. They do that
Yeah.
with all like the hog fuel. It's all the wasted bark and all that, like just the stuff that
you
is
never use.
used to go to a beehive burner, and now they just, and rather than just burning it in this ugly beehive burner, they now burn it really a lot hotter. They make electrical power out of the waste rather than burning it all in like a slash pile out in the bush or burning it in a beehive burner in the mill. They burn it, produce power. The power could then go to the trucks parked in the yard to produce power for the trucks to go up and get it. So you could technically, if you had it, almost have like a net zero logging cycle of a truck parks in the yard, starts at stay with a full charge, that gets it all the way up, empty into the mill, regenerative braking. Maybe it needs a generator for half an hour to get to the mill or back when it's loaded, goes back up, a little bit of backup, but plugs back in. But it's kind of cool that even if you could do it where it's fully electric, you could literally go out, log, take it, make the wood, take the waste product that used to get burned in a slash pile, burn it to produce electricity for the logging truck to go back. Like, it's a complete closed loop circuit of energy in the forestry industry, and I really, really like that.
Yep. Yeah. And then there was one final cool point that we should do for the YouTubes. Here in British Columbia, we have BC Hydro. They have a monopoly on power generation, so we have pretty much fixed rates. In America, they also have fixed rates. You guys know how in America there's normally no monopolies? Normally no monopolies.
Isn't BlackRock and Vanguard like own everything?
I mean, yeah, okay, but let's say yes.
Okay, yes. No monopolies. There is.
Take
in Canada, we have Crown Corp, so it's a very different
Take
story.
two. There's no monopolies in the States, guys.
So you guys know how in America typically monopolies are illegal, like there are no monopolies and stuff like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what's interesting is that when it comes to power generation, that's not the case. Instead, major power corporations negotiate with the federal government to reach a fixed rate of power cost. But in exchange for that right to provide power and have a monopoly over a certain geographic region, they have an obligation to provide power, which means they have to provide hookups to like homes or, power lines to the edge of homes, or provide charging stations. So what's interesting about that is that they're the ones that are going to be deciding where the major power recharging stations are, or they have the ability to. So they decide where the next sort of gas stations for electric vehicles will be.
Oh,
they'll decide where all of your trucks pull off the interstates to recharge, which means they decide where the next McDonald's goes and where the next fast food companies go. So I think there's a real potential there too if you synergize with those major major electrical companies and work with them and say, hey, we have technology that shows the best place to locate charging stations, and the major technology companies need to know where to put these chargers in.
Yeah, because you can show, be like, hey, all these trucks are running low on battery power right here, and you could, especially, you could go with hook that in with the e-log system, the energy system, use that data to be like, hey, we're finding that drivers are approaching like 3-4 hours in their daily cycle. They're going to need to take their half-hour break. And this is the point in their half-hour break where they're running low on charge, where they could pull in, put their truck on charge for 30 minutes while they're having their lunch, go in, grab a burger, come back after their break, put in a better charge, keep that generator shut off for a little bit longer, because it's always cheaper to hook to the grid than it is to produce diesel power.
Oh, yeah.
It is. It's
so much cheaper.
It's still a quarter of the cost to be plugged into your household power or your shop power than it is the diesel power.
And sometimes less.
Sometimes less than a quarter. But yeah.
Pretty amazing.
I was thinking like the charging levels. Like you pay a lot more
at. They got a big profit.
Yeah, they make a huge profit off it.
At least 100%
you pay like 12 cents a kilowatt at your house. You pay like 25, 30 at the charger. But that 30 is still a quarter of the price, because this one is like 65 cents per kilowatt, 60 cents a kilowatt hour out of the diesel generator. So you're still reducing it, half, quarter to half. So if you could have that, and you could put in the areas where people stop, owner-operated company drivers probably won't care. I just know company drivers won't.
Yeah.
If they had the hybrid, they just... But an owner-operator is like, oh, got to stop for breakfast and coffee anyways. Plug in there. All right, swipe the card. There we go. Well, that's saving me $100. Like, it basically, the amount you save by pulling in at strategic locations like that pays for your meal like 4 times over. So you pull in, your fuel savings from plugging into the charger pays for your meal 4 times. So you basically get a free meal.
And you have to pull in regardless. Like, it's the law, so you might as well.
Yeah. Not in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
Loggers in Canada can run 15 hours straight without stopping, no problem. But
Touche.
But where you could do that is you incentivize these companies, because the companies know that, like, hey, that meal costs $25. But if he pulls in and plugs in, I save 100. Well, that's 75. What if a company just incentivizes the driver and be like, hey, if you stop and plug in, when you're stopped and plug in, we'll give you $35 for your meal. Like, hey, every time you plug in, we'll give you $30-$40. You go in, have breakfast, have your lunch. We'll pay for you to have lunch, because our fuel, our money savings from plugging in the truck, like, that's how it. Imagine every company driver has their meal paid just because they stopped and didn't run the diesel because they ran the shore power. Sorry, we're kind of brainstorming now, but
oh no.
But guaranteed though, like, that is the projection, that is the future of all the infrastructure, right? Especially for vocational and commercial vehicles. It's about where those nodes of charging will be, and it has to work. Like, big substations are required to deliver those multi-megawatts. Like the substation at the biomass plant you were talking about is for 40 megawatts. It's pretty huge. Those transformers there are enormous. And even a typical Tesla charging station, those transformers are pretty huge. Usually they have 2 of them for about anywhere from 5 to 20. So just think about the infrastructure requirements. Yeah, it'd be really good to get early on conversations going with the power utilities, because then you have an understanding of where they might be located, and then you use the data to sort of justify some of their decisions.
This is actually that totally good behind the scenes peek of how, like, this is how, like, 90% of our discussions in engineering, it just builds off of these sitting around coffee. This time we have a camera, but a lot of this is not a scripted talk. We are just figuring things out as we go here, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah, watch this in 10 years, see what happened.
Yeah, watch and be like, oh yeah, that's how that data works, or whatever.
There's a free taco and a coffee. I'm like, whoa, right on.
Well, and this is actually kind of a unique behind the scenes thing. It was like, we normally don't talk about all our data at Edison Motors publicly. Like, we mainly focus on the trucks, but now you're kind of seeing this behind the scenes, like, data part of it, where we're talking about how do we optimize the generator, how do we have a truck time to fire up, fire off. You could tie that into, like, if it's an E-log requirement, you got a guy with E-log, the generator and the computer knows, well, he's got a half hour left for the day, I've got enough battery range to make it, I'll just stay shut off because I know he's going to plug me in at the shop later in the day.
Exactly.
Oh, I guess you could use that to decide, because as a transition between hybrid trucks and fully electric and diesel, they could actually optimize and say, well, okay, the diesel electric truck should be on this haul, the normal diesel truck on this haul can take a fully electric one. The math, so they can actually allocate their assets. I just figured that out now. Sorry.
Yeah. I set it up for the different powertrain efficiencies and regenerative braking efficiencies.
Yeah, I didn't even think. As a transition, you could enter all that, and it'll just be like, oh, put this truck on this haul, this truck on this haul, this one on this haul.
And that's the cool thing too, right? Over time, battery technology will improve. So those large numbers of kilowatt hours required for the batteries, over time, it'll be more realistic just because of cost and weight, right? But it'd be cool to say, okay, if you theoretically wanted to do this route on a full electric vehicle with no generator, here's what you need to accomplish. And that gives us an incentive to say, oh, it's actually kind of reasonable, it's not impossible. Okay, let's get going here. Let's try to improve batteries, right? So yeah, that's just a cool thing to think about, right?
Wow.
We got a lot of space in this hill.
We do. That's the best reason I've heard to keep a big high hood. Oh, like a full electric. Like I never got that. They're like, where are we putting every electric manufacturer? They're like, where are we putting the batteries? There's no space for batteries. But they're always trying to use a big slope nose. And you're like, why not use a big W900, stack that hood right full of batteries? Because then you put the weight of the batteries on the steer tire, which gives you better grip, better handling, and you leave the weight off the drives, which is where you want your payload. Like, use long-nose Peterbilts, long-nose Kenworths for the electric truck because you can jam way more batteries under the hood.
Well, I hope you convinced them today, and if they're watching us, I mean, that'd be pretty awesome.
The problem is that it doesn't fit the narrative for the electric. For whatever reason, they see the big high hood trucks and they just don't like the look of the big high hood trucks or whatever when they do the electric. But I don't know why Kenworth doesn't come out with like a W990, like their newest one, their newest aerodynamic one. Load that big 990 hood right full of batteries right to the top. You know how much more extra, like, it puts the weight on, just...
Because rectangles are so efficient to pack those cells, right? I mean, obviously a cylinder is what the batteries look like, but the new batteries I think will be more of a square form just because of the new gel technologies coming out. Like, that's technically what we have. We have these gel packs which essentially sit in rectangles. So if you stick to a rectangle vessel or medium, you can easily pack more than a triangle, right? If it's, let's say, a triangular hood. So, I mean, to stick with this design is actually brilliant.
And EVs don't need as big a radiator, so you can bring back the old needle nose. And the needle nose, I still think, is an incredibly fuel efficient. Like, if you look at the aerodynamics of this truck compared to any other truck, it's actually, when you think about it, your hood is so narrow on this thing that the wind just kind of slices through. Like, it's got that narrow hood that slices the wind through. It's got a cutout, the wind slices through here, rolls over. This is actually a relatively aerodynamic truck.
The surface area is so tight here, right? So,
there's not a lot for the wind to catch on this thing. So if you loaded up these old needle nose Kenworths jack full of batteries for your, rather than making it a slope nose that comes down, and they're wide slope noses. That's the other issue, is that if you look at all these ones, the hood is the full width, but it's wide and it's low, and that's the worst for batteries because, well, you can't put batteries in the fender. You can only put batteries in there. But if you narrow those batteries, stack them up, have a knife shape that slices through the wind, like, that's a better design for an electric vehicle, is the needle nose Kenworth. But they won't do it because then it looks like an old truck.
Well, who knows? They might be watching.
No.
I hope they are.
We had a great time. Like, working with you has been fantastic. Eric said nothing but good things.
Yeah, well, thanks for, like, even looking at my original model and saying, hey, like, let's build something upon this. So really appreciate you reaching out and just making our lives, like, just really fun to work on this kind of stuff.
When you showed me that,
I'm so passionate about it.
When you were like, I had this on my to-do list, and I was like, I already did it. I was serendipity.
All right, well, thank you, Dave.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the time.
Wicked.
Cool.
All right.
That's a good one.
Back to the shop.